Here we go again. Welcome everyone. My name is Nick and I'm a member of Robbinsdale for Racial Justice and I'm a resident of Ward 3 near Lee Park. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I want to especially thank Rachel Benson, our Robbinsdale Ward 2 City Council Ward 2 candidate, for speaking with us today. The intentions of this meeting is to allow space for us to talk about racial justice and equity issues as they pertain to elected officials ahead of the primary election coming up on August 11th. Several members of Robbinsdale for Racial Justice Group have come up with a series of questions, and I presented these questions to Rachel a couple days ago. We are here to listen to become better informed voters. And for those of us who are white members of the community, we are here to be better allies to our neighbors who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. With that said, we will allow space for follow-up questions from the audience at the end. And white people will defer and listen to BIPOC members when they have something to say. This meeting is recorded. As you can see the little recording icon on the top left of your screen. You'll notice the audience microphones are muted for the first part of this meeting. At the end of the meeting, I'll unmute the mics and allow people to ask questions if they prefer. This meeting is as structured as followed. In a moment, Ms. Benson will have 5 minutes to introductions and an opening statement. Then we'll spend about 30 minutes asking questions that we voted on. And then we'll take roughly about 15 minutes for open discussion or open questions. Finally, Rachel will have 2 minutes or so for closing statements, and we'll wrap up the meeting. Rachel, I want to thank you for being here. Will you please introduce yourself and give your opening statement, please?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Rachel Benson. Once again, I'm running to represent Ward 2 at Robbinsdale City Council. I've lived here for about 3 years, and I'm raising my 2 children, ages, they grow so fast, 6 and 4, with my husband, Jace. I'm originally from Anoka, Minnesota. I'm a graduate of Metropolitan State University with a social science degree. I completed my internship at Somali Family Services. As a career, I have a diverse background, including teaching English in South Korea, being a census taker, 8 years working and managing group homes for adults with disabilities, and being a special education assistant for Minneapolis Public Schools. For the last 7 years, I've been a stay-at-home mom, focusing on raising my 2 kids. I will use my passion for advocacy to ensure that Robbinsdale is a city we can be proud to call home. In the 3 years I've been here, I've enjoyed the city. I love the parks, the restaurants, the small town atmosphere. I've been excited to see the growth that we've had in Robbinsdale, from the construction of Hy-Vee to the new housing. Our robust downtown food and brew scene has been bursting since I've arrived. All of that attracts visitors to experience all that Robbinsdale has to offer. But this year has put a strain on many of our neighbors and brought to light some of the problems that were pre-existing that we now have noticed. The impacts of COVID, systemic racism, and social injustice has commanded a response from the city, and I hope to be a part of that solution. The COVID outbreak has put into perspective the balance that we're living between safety and financial security. With 49% of people in America living paycheck to paycheck, families are quickly losing the ability to make mortgage payments and keep up with bills. We're facing a financial and housing crisis. The city needs to prepare and plan for the sharp decrease in tax revenue, along with the increasing support that's going to be needed from not only citizens and community members, but businesses. And we need to think outside of our box to find ways to assist our community and these citizens. People are rightfully cautious to return to businesses, knowing that they're going to run into people who don't necessarily take the proper precautions when it comes to COVID, which is affecting these businesses. And we need to navigate a solution that aggressively protects not only patrons and employees, but businesses alike. Racism has been embedded into the structural framework of America. The murder of George Floyd just re-illuminated the great disparities that exist in our country. We need to commit to making lasting change. Our community in Robbinsdale, Minnesota is like the most like racially divided state in the North. Sometimes they refer to it as the Jim Crow of the North, because even our community has a huge history of redlining, which banned the sales of homes to Blacks and Jewish people. The language still exists in many of our housing deeds. It's a huge deterrent for people moving into our town, seeing that language and knowing the history and knowing that a lot of those people and those ideas still exist here. And that's not what Robbinsdale is about. And I think we're moving forward from that, but we need to do more to help welcome the community and bring us together. More than ever, our city needs to come up with a policing system that makes sense for our entire community. In order to do that, we have to collaborate with BIPOC leaders and community members to find a solution that works for everyone. In instances where our standards are not met, resolution has to come in a timely fashion and with proper transparency. In addition to racism, I think we need to focus on social justice for our LGBTQIA+ citizens. Last year during Pride Weekend, a local church was home to a conference on conversion therapy, which is banned in 20 states as well as the District of Columbia, because conversion therapy poses profound harm to its participants. In order to become the prosperous, growing, and inclusive community Robbinsdale strives for, we got to take a stand against all violations to human rights. Over the next 4 years, I hope to help the city navigate its way through the COVID-19 health and economic crisis. Together, as a community, we can make Robbinsdale an inclusive city that stands up for human rights and implement policies that ensure our city is a place that we can continue to be proud to call home. And I encourage everybody, I thank you all for coming and listening to me. If you want to know more about me, you can visit my webpage at rachel.benson.run.
All right, thank you for that. For the next part of our meeting, we're going to be asking a series of questions that the group submitted and organized in advance. For transparency's sake, these questions were presented to Rachel a few days ago. By the way, any other candidate that is also part of these meetings with the group and other Zoom calls, these are the same questions that were asked in the same order. So to reiterate, we rank these questions from the most important to, well, they're all equally important, but from most to least, for lack of a better word, and we're asking those in that order. I'll refrain from asking any follow-up questions at this time, but Rachel, if you see any activity in the chat box and you want to answer it in real time, by all means, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we can wait until the last 15 minutes or after the questions that I'll be asking you to address those near the end of the meeting. If you have any answer that kind of exceeds over 2 to 3 minutes, or just in general, you get very long-winded, again, for lack of a better term, I'll kindly just say, hey, 15 seconds, and that'll be a cue to kind of wrap up your questions. Does that sound okay with you?
Sounds great.
Cool. We'll jump right into it. What are some racial inequalities you identify in Robbinsdale, and what are the metrics you would use to measure the progress in those areas?
So in Robbinsdale, as I look down my street, we only have one family that consists of people of color on our block. There's definitely a lack of diversity, especially in home ownership in Robbinsdale. I think it can be easily measured in statistics of seeing who's buying homes in Robbinsdale. I think a significant part of that has to do with our history of redlining. We're very like white, for a lack of a better word here. And I think like the housing market is gonna crash pretty soon. And I think it's an opportunity for a lot of people to come and join our community. And I think we have to do stuff to attract those people to our community. I think our police department has a history of racial profiling and kind of people always say like, oh, you live in Robbinsdale. I wouldn't drive down 81 after like 9 o'clock because I'm an African-American and I'm gonna get pulled over and hassled. That's a huge problem. It's a deterrent from people visiting our city. It's a deterrent from people visiting the businesses, let alone living here. Education-wise, Lakeview is one of the lowest ranking test score school in the area. It's also one of the most diverse elementary schools in the area. So we struggle with that. I think we have a great opportunity to raise all that stuff. It's hard during COVID because we have to have the social distancing and the remote schooling, but I think there's a great opportunity for after school programs and tutoring to help students succeed. Crime-free housing is an issue. It's kind of not allowing everyone into the area when they're questioned about, well, why don't we get rid of this crime-free housing? Because many people have been convicted of very petty crimes, usually to do with drugs. If we could get rid of that, I think it would allow more diversity in the area. And those are some of the issues I see that we can work to overcome.
All right, thanks. What strategies would you use to increase racial equity in Robbinsdale if elected?
I think we really have to listen to the community and what the community needs. Like, I can say it would be great to do A, B, C, and D, but what is going to actually help increase the equality? I think we need to listen to the BIPOC community to tell us what they're looking for from us and make that happen.
Great. Have you done any personal work or learning on the topics of racism? And if so, of what nature? So
I think the best way to learn about the topic of racism is just listening. Listen to people's stories, acknowledge, we can't deny other people's experiences. So listening to that, understanding what they went through, understanding how they propose we fix that and prevent that from happening in the future, and being a part of that solution, and listening to other people and their rhetoric, and sometimes calling them out on, like, you know, what you're saying isn't exactly true and it's not acceptable. It's sometimes needed. And I think right now it's the perfect time to do that and get this equality that we've been striving for so long. We all say, like, it's such a dream in the future, but we have to make this dream that we see so far away come closer and happen more readily.
All right, thanks. How would you hold the RPD, Robbinsdale Police Department, accountable if they were inappropriate or caught using harmful actions to the community?
I think we really need, like, a citizens task force to hear what's actually happening in the RPD. I've heard anecdotal stories. A couple months ago, there was a mother who went to the police department to confront over an issue of her son getting pulled out of a car in the house, the car inspected for marijuana, and then the son ended up being released and drove home. That story, it just, like, drives home to you, like, what's actually happening, because that car could have easily been towed away. That man could have been cited for his driving without a license or whatever. But I think the officer jumped to conclusions, pulled the kid out of the car, didn't find any drugs in the car, regretted his decision of pulling the kid out of the car and doing what was wrong, so let the kid just go on his merry way with a citation. They have to be held accountable. It's like, whether it's, like, racially driven that this jumping to conclusions and questioning and unprofessional behavior is happening, or if it's just a lack of professionalism, I think we need transparency from the city. We need answers. We need accountability to the citizens, what the Citizens Task Force would provide, and we need it to happen in a timely fashion. And I think a lot of the struggle is, a lot of them, they're seemingly protected by their union. So if the police do something really bad, the city pays for it. We need to have a way for the city to come back after those police officers and recoup some of that money. It's not fair. Like, if you're a doctor, you have insurance for malpractice. If you're a police officer and you're committing crimes, the city just fixes it for you or covers it up. And that's a huge problem in America in general.
All right. Thanks for that. What policy changes have you contributed to in support of racial justice and equity? And that's just in general. This was more targeted towards like someone that's been in office, but in your workspace, any instance in your life where you contributed in support of racial justice and equity?
So I have, for a long time since moving to Robbinsdale, been a member of an organization called Moms Club, which is an international organization. It supports stay-at-home moms. Lots of people join in, like, after they just had a kid and don't know what to do. And it gives you like kind of an outlet. Moms in the same phase of life. They had like daily play dates that you could attend, monthly meetings and educational stuff. And then after the George Floyd murder, a great group of us in California made a beautiful collage about racial justice and how racism ends with us. We're raising these children. We can raise them to like fight injustice and be anti-racist. And they sent it to the parent, the global organization, and the global organization failed to present their beautiful collage and said that it was a political issue. They're a nonprofit, it's not their responsibility, and in fact, they shouldn't be touting anti-racist rhetoric. So across the nation, hundreds of branches have disbanded. We chose to disband and stand up against racism and the choice of the national organization to make racism a political issue rather than a human rights issue. Unfortunately, in our group, we've learned that not everyone shares our views. In fact, when we disbanded, we had money left over. We decided who to give it to. We gave it to two organizations that supported persons of color. And then the third place organization was an organization that supported moms. And our treasurer misappropriated the funds and gave way more money to the third organization that supported moms because she didn't think that the other two organizations deserved it. So I think standing up to that kind of stuff, you can ask an organization to change their views, but when they double down on it, sometimes you just have to cut ties and realize that you can make your own mom's club, so to say, that is full of like-minded people who are anti-racist and are raising their children to be interested in social justice and creating a beautiful new community.
Awesome. Thanks for that. What would be your first action as city council member to ensure Robbinsdale is starting down a path working towards racial equity among our residents, businesses, and schools?
So my first action is I think we need to listen to what our community wants. As much as I'd like to say, like, this is the solution, this is how we make equality happen, I don't know what people of color want, what the BIPOC community is anticipating from us. And I think the first step is listening to these people's stories. What has their experience in Robbinsdale been? And then from their stories, how do we right the wrongs that Robbinsdale has done?
All right, thanks for that. How would you use Robbinsdale Human Rights Commission as a resource?
So I think Robbinsdale Human Rights Commission is how we do that. They're a safe place, so to say. They have experience. They're still learning just like all of us. And I think they're really working on getting those stories from the citizens and from the people and from the everyone who lives in Robbinsdale about what they've experienced. How do we become a more racially diverse community that supports all of our citizens, especially the people of color?
All right. What changes do you envision for the Robbinsdale Police Department?
Mom? Hold on, buddy. So for the Robbinsdale Police Department, it seems like every time something goes wrong, buddy, I'll come talk to you in a little bit, okay? Can you go see Daddy? Thanks. So for the Robbinsdale Police Department, it seems like every time something goes wrong, they say, we're not equipped to handle mental health issues. We're not equipped to handle drug issues. We're not equipped to handle homelessness issues. So either through training, which I think we're better than some cities, and through getting social workers that on the force that can like actually make a difference. Like I think we have an open position right now, and they always say how like every time there's an open slot in the police department, it's very hard to fill. I think we need to be recruiting young people from college, getting them into the programs, and doing a better job of recruiting the people who can help our community and not just settling for the people who apply for the job. We need to have the best people in the force that can provide a safe place and provide services to the community. Is that necessarily another police officer? No. Sometimes it's a social worker. Sometimes it's an addiction counselor. But our solution isn't that when something goes wrong, we say, we don't have the sources we need, but don't take any of our money to provide us with those sources. It's a balance, and there's a lot of stigma behind the defund the police thing. But if you think about it as rather than defunding, just reallocating resources, I think it makes it a lot easier for people to digest.
Thank you. Do you have any contacts or community partnerships in Robbinsdale or in local communities that you would use as a resource to advance racial equity? If not, how would you go about creating those contacts and partnerships?
I don't have any contacts or partnerships right now, but I think at this time, we're at such an amazing time where if you're willing to learn, everybody is willing to teach you. And the city has great partnerships with our Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission has great partnerships. And I think as long as we're willing to listen to the partners that exist, learn and grow, our city's in a great position.
All right. What is your number one priority or goal as city council member?
My number one goal is just getting through these next 4 years. I think we're in for a rude awakening. We've been like bumper crops for the last long while with great buildings, money to spare, and we're gonna really be hitting a housing market slump, less taxes, people out of work, people sick, people dying, and it's just managing how do we get through these next 4 years and come out the other end as a community that's drawn together rather than torn apart, and a community that's able to still say, we're growing, we're striving for something, we've gotten A, B, C, and D through our hard work, and not leaving a ton of debt for the next round of people to come in and manage.
Great. When should the City of Robbinsdale take lead on social issues, and when should the city wait for action at the state or federal level?
I think the city needs to take action when it's affecting our citizens. we can't wait, especially for the federal level, to do stuff. We're kind of protected in our own little Minnesota circle, but at the same time, based on the murder of George Floyd, that Minnesota circle isn't protecting us. It's not protecting our people of color. Whenever personally I'd see something happen, I'd be like, oh, that's Florida, or that's Georgia, or that's the South. As atrocious as it is, only one cop committed that crime. And then when you see something like the murder of George Floyd, where all the cops are doing it and active participants, and you realize that this is really like built into the framework of our institution, it's time for the city to act now. We can't wait for the state or the federal to come and protect our citizens. We have to be protecting our community. We have to be promoting our community. We have to be listening to our community most of all. And we have to be doing what our community wants and needs from us. Because the state's not going to do it for us. The state has a lot of different communities with a lot of different issues than our personal issues. And the federal government has a lot of different stuff that it's focused on. And it's not focused on social or racial justice.
On that note, what is your vision for ensuring all Robbinsdale residents feel safe and free from harmful prejudices?
So my vision for it happening is that we come together as a community. We understand that not everybody is as understanding to what is happening in the world as we are in this group. Many people, they kind of deny other people's experience. They don't understand white privilege. They don't have the capacity to have the meaningful conversations. And I think we have to kind of understand that talking about race is uncomfortable for many people. It's messy, but it has to happen to get to that meaningful change. So in order to have this peaceful coexistence and place where we need to be, we have to be talking in order to have the change. So I think the first thing happens is this conversation. The Human Rights Commission, I think, is an invaluable resource. Like, they're going to be used so much to accomplish this stuff. And I think that's how we get there, is talking, listening, understanding, and doing what needs to be done, not necessarily according to us. We don't have the solution, but according to the BIPOC community.
All right, and continuing to build on everything that you're saying, if elected, will you find it important to allocate city funds towards racial equity programs?
I think it is important to allocate those city funds. It's going to be a struggle because we're not going to have those funds in the next 4 years. But where do we find those funds? We reallocate them from the police department. We do stuff that's not going to be expensive. After school programs we could work on at the community center or at parks, online stuff. A lot of high schoolers need to fulfill volunteer credits. We can get help from them. Our community, like 6 people are running for this role. It's not looking, we need to use the people who are here and willing to help. Obviously, we have an abundance of people who are willing to help, which is a great thing. And I think city resources need to be used for some of it, but a lot of it, the change is going to come from within our community and from within our citizens.
Thank you for that. We're coming up on our last question. So for those in here that are brewing up some questions in your head, feel free to start typing them out. Otherwise, I'll we got a small group. I'll unmute everyone after this final question. All right. Do you feel that the city parks and recreation serve all residents living in Robbinsdale?
I think they strive to, but clearly lack the ability to. Robbinsdale City's parks and recreation, when you look at the city parks surrounding us, there are so many other programs. Our kids are in Mighty Mites in Golden Valley because Robbinsdale doesn't have a program like it. And I think there's so much room for us to grow, for us to be able to have an after-school program for kids, for us to be able to have scholarships for programs so all kids can participate, for us to be able to change times. Not every baseball game can be on the weekend that parents are working. I think although we try to, I think we have great parks, but our recreation department could definitely use a little working on. If we have a great fishing pier, if we had a fishing program for all kids to come and to participate in, provided the fishing poles, bait for them to get a little learning on how to fish. I think there's opportunities that we need to take advantage of.
All right, thank you, Rachel. We've now covered all the questions that the group has prepared for you. And I'm gonna have some time for those in the meeting to ask you any follow-up questions that we've asked so far. So I'm gonna unmute all the mics here.
Sounds good.
And feel free to just jump in and ask Rachel some questions. I'll be quiet now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Ann.
Okay. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for joining us tonight. I like what you said about listening to our community, to our BIPOC community to find out kind of what the issues are before we try to solve them. And I'm curious this is historically a group that has not felt as involved or welcome in local government. And I'm wondering what strategies you might use to kind of open up those listening spaces or seek out that information.
I think our Human Rights Commission is doing a great job working towards getting people to feel comfortable bringing out those stories. A lot of those stories you can find on Facebook, and what they're met with in our community is sometimes very disturbing. So I think if we just have like a safe Facebook page that they could go to and say, look, this was my experience, and maybe not allow commentary on it, people could see it, people could absorb it, people could not read the umpteen thousand people's opinions that either agree with them and support their bias, and just acknowledge that this was this person's experience and this is what happened to them, and this is our community that allowed it to happen. So it could be as simple as a Facebook page, but I think our biggest helper in achieving this is the Human Rights Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like this is a healthy amount of pause and waiting time. Don't want it to get to that point where it's too awkward. So if there's no other questions at this time, we've spent the block of 15 minutes covering the questions that we did have. And we'll be bringing this meeting now to a close. And Rachel, I invite you to provide a brief or long closing statement, and where people can find you online, and actually the best way to continue these conversations outside of this meeting.
So I can be found online at my website, rachel.benson.run. I'm of course on Facebook under my name, Rachel Benson. Feel free to email me at rachel@benson.run. Thanks for having me. I think this is a topic that is long overdue to be discussed. It's a topic that many of us are newly aware of the severity of what's actually happening in our state, that it's not something that's in a far off distant part of America, but it's happening in our own backyard. And I think it's a topic that we can really make a difference in our community, in our town, in the lives of the people who live here, in the lives of the people who visit here, in the lives of the people who work here. And I'm hopeful for where Robbinsdale is going to be in 4 years with our listening ears. And thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending. Again, thank you, Ms. Benson, for your time with us today. Everyone, please make sure that you're registered to vote. I think, well, yeah, just make sure you're registered to vote just in general. Vote early by mail, and be sure your ballot is postmarked by August 11th. If you do decide to vote in person on the 11th, please wear your mask and practice social distancing. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, of course.